The desert is quiet at night. The wind moves slowly across the sand, soft and patient, like it has all the time in the world. The grains shift in small patterns, brushing against each other with a sound so faint it almost disappears before it can be heard. Above, the sky stretches wide and dark, filled with distant stars that glow gently, without hurry. And there, resting beneath that sky, sits the great stone figure. The Sphinx. It does not move. It does not speak. It simply waits. For thousands of years, it has remained in the same place, facing the rising sun, watching the horizon in silence. Its body is that of a lion, stretched long and low across the earth. Its face, worn and softened by time, still holds a calm and steady expression. The nose is gone. The surface is rough. The edges have faded. But the presence remains. It feels less like a statue, and more like something that has always been there. As if it belongs to the desert itself. Long before the cities of today, long before the roads and lights and distant sounds of modern life, there was only sand, sky, and the slow rhythm of nature. In that quiet world, people lived along the banks of a great river. The Nile. Each year, the river would rise and fall, bringing dark soil to the land. The fields would grow green. Crops would rise under the warm sun. And life would continue in a steady, repeating cycle. Morning would begin with soft light spreading across the horizon. People would wake early, before the heat became too strong. They would walk across the fields, their feet brushing the cool ground, carrying tools worn smooth by use. They worked slowly, carefully. Planting. Watering. Harvesting. There was no rush. The days were long, but they followed a simple rhythm. The sound of water moving through channels. The rustle of reeds. The quiet voices of people speaking in low tones. At midday, the sun would stand high in the sky. The heat would settle over everything, pressing gently but firmly. Work would slow. Shade would become important. People would rest where they could. Under small structures made of wood and cloth. Near walls built from mud brick. Beside the river, where the air felt just a little cooler. Then, as the sun began to lower again, the work would continue. And slowly, over time, something else began to rise from this land. Stone. Large blocks, cut carefully and moved with effort. Carried across the ground by many hands. Placed one by one, in ways that required patience more than force. Structures began to take shape. At first, they were simple. Then larger. Then more precise. The people who built them did not rush. They worked in groups, guided by those who understood the shapes and the lines, the balance, and the alignment. They looked at the sky often. The stars. The sun. The way shadows moved across the ground. Everything was connected. And somewhere within this growing world of stone and earth, the idea of something different began to form. Not just a building. Not just a place to live or store or gather. But something that would remain. Something that would watch. Something that would hold a kind of quiet meaning that did not need to be explained. The Sphinx. No one can say exactly when the idea first appeared. It may have started as a simple thought. A shape drawn in sand. A figure imagined in the mind of someone looking out across the desert. A lion, strong and still. A human face, calm and aware. Together, they formed something that felt both natural and strange. A creature that did not exist, yet seemed familiar. When the carving began, it did not begin quickly. The stone chosen was not brought from far away. It was already there. A ridge of limestone rising from the ground. Workers gathered around it. Tools in hand. Stone against stone. The first cuts were slow. Careful. They removed what was not needed, little by little, allowing the shape to emerge over time. Dust filled the air. Fine and pale, settling softly on skin and cloth. The sound of carving was steady, not loud, but constant. Tap. Pause. Tap again. Days passed. Then more days. Seasons shifted. The sun traced the same path across the sky, again and again, while the figure slowly took form. The body came first. Long and low, stretched across the ground like a resting animal. The front paws extended forward, symmetrical and calm. Then the head. Larger than expected. Carefully shaped. The face required more attention. More time. More precision. Features were carved with intention, though time would later soften them. The eyes were set to look forward. Not at anything specific. But outward. Always outward. As if watching something that never fully arrives. When it was complete, the Sphinx did not stand above the land. It rested within it. Part of the earth. Part of the silence. And from that moment on, it remained. Years passed into decades. Decades into centuries. The people who built it lived their lives. They worked, they rested, they aged. They told stories in quiet voices, sitting close together as the evening air cooled. Children grew. Learned. Watched the same horizon. The Sphinx was always there. Sometimes, the sand would rise. Wind would carry it slowly, grain by grain, until parts of the great figure were covered. The body would disappear beneath soft layers, leaving only the head visible. Then, over time, the sand might shift again, revealing what had been hidden. This cycle repeated. Again and again. As if the desert itself was breathing. And through it all, the Sphinx did not change. Not in any way that could be easily seen. But questions began to gather around it. Quiet questions. The kind that do not demand answers. Who was it meant to represent? Why was it built here? Why this shape? Why this size? The people of that time may have had answers. Or they may have simply accepted it as part of their world, the way one accepts the sun rising or the river flowing. But as generations passed, knowledge shifted. Details faded. Meanings softened. Stories changed. And slowly, the Sphinx became something else. Not just a creation. But a mystery. A presence that held its silence carefully. As if it knew something, but chose not to speak. The wind continues to move across the desert. Soft. Steady. Unhurried. And the Sphinx remains. Watching. Waiting. Morning comes gently to the desert. At first, there is only a faint light along the edge of the horizon. A pale line, soft and quiet, slowly widening as the sky begins to shift from deep blue into a lighter shade. The air is cool for a short while. Still. Peaceful. The sand, which held the warmth of yesterday, now feels calm again beneath the early light. And the great stone figure, resting where it has always rested, begins to take shape once more as the darkness fades. The Sphinx faces the east. It meets the sunrise every day. Not with movement, not with change, but with a steady stillness that never seems to break. As the first rays of sunlight touch its surface, the stone begins to glow faintly. The edges of its form become clearer. The long body, the extended paws, the broad chest, and the quiet face all return from shadow into light. This happens every day. Without interruption. Without pause. And over long stretches of time, these small, repeated moments begin to carry a deeper feeling. The people who lived near the Sphinx would have seen this again and again. They would have woken early, stepping outside into the soft morning air, looking across the land as the light slowly spread. Some may have paused. Just for a moment. Watching how the sunlight reached the Sphinx first, or how its shadow stretched long across the ground behind it. They may not have spoken about it much. But they would have noticed. The way light and stone seemed to meet in a quiet pattern. The way each day began in the same calm rhythm. Life continued around it. Fields were tended. Water was drawn from the Nile. Clay was shaped into vessels. Bread was baked slowly over small fires. The smell of grain and warmth filled the air in simple homes made of mud brick. Voices remained low. Footsteps steady. Even the animals moved in familiar ways, following paths worn gently into the earth over time. And always, nearby, the Sphinx remained. Not as something separate, but as something woven into the landscape itself. Children may have grown up seeing it from a distance. At first, perhaps, it felt large and strange. Something difficult to understand. But over time, it became normal. Part of the background of life. Like the hills. Like the sky. Like the river. The questions it carried may not have felt urgent. They may not have needed answers. But time has a way of changing how things are seen. As generations passed, stories began to form. Not quickly. Not all at once. But slowly, shaped by memory and imagination. Some may have said the Sphinx was a guardian. A silent watcher placed to protect something important. Something hidden. Others may have believed it represented a ruler. A face carved in stone to reflect power and calm strength. The body of a lion, strong and grounded. The face of a human, thoughtful and aware. Together, these forms created a balance. Something that felt both natural and symbolic at the same time. But even these ideas were not fixed. They shifted, like sand. Changing slightly with each retelling. Some details were forgotten. Others were added. And so, the mystery did not fade. It grew. Gently. Quietly. The surface of the Sphinx also began to change. Not all at once. But in small ways that added up over long periods. The wind continued its slow work. Carrying grains of sand across the stone, brushing against it again and again. At first, the changes were too small to notice. A slight smoothing here. A faint line softened there. But over years, then centuries, the effects became clearer. Edges lost their sharpness. Details became less defined. The face, once carefully shaped, began to wear down. Not in a sudden way. But in the same slow rhythm that shaped everything in the desert. The same rhythm that moved the dunes. The same rhythm that carried the seasons forward. At times, the sand would rise high enough to cover much of the Sphinx again. Only the head visible above the surface, looking out across a sea of soft, shifting ground. Then, later, the sand would recede, revealing more of the body once more. This cycle gave the Sphinx a feeling of appearing and disappearing. As if it belonged partly to the world above, and partly to something beneath. Something hidden. People came and went. Some stayed near the river. Others traveled, carrying goods, sharing stories, building connections between distant places. And as they moved, they brought with them different ways of seeing the world, different beliefs, different questions. Some who saw the Sphinx for the first time may have stood quietly before it, taking in its size, its stillness, its age, trying to understand what they were looking at. But understanding did not come easily, because the Sphinx does not explain itself. It does not offer clear answers. It simply exists. And in that existence, it leaves space. Space for thought. Space for wondering. Space for silence. As more time passed, even the memory of its creation began to fade. The names of those who carved it, the reasons they had, the exact meaning it once held. These things became less certain. And when certainty fades, mystery takes its place. Not as something loud or demanding, but as something soft, lingering, unresolved. The desert continued its quiet patterns. The sun rose. The sun set. The wind moved. The sand shifted. And the Sphinx remained where it had always been. Still facing the horizon. Still watching the slow turning of the world. Its presence did not change the daily lives of most people. They still worked. They still rested. They still lived within the steady rhythm of the Nile and the land. But somewhere in the background, the Sphinx continued to hold its place. Unmoving. Unchanging in purpose, even if its surface slowly wore down. And the questions remained. Not pressing. Not urgent. But always there. Like a quiet thought that never fully leaves. Who shaped this figure? What did they hope it would become? What did they believe it would do? These questions did not need answers right away. They could wait. Just as the Sphinx waited. Through long days. Through quiet nights. Through years that passed without notice. And so the mystery deepened. Not through sudden discovery, but through the simple passage of time. The kind of time that moves slowly, gently, almost without being felt. Until one day, long after the first hands had touched the stone, new eyes would look upon it again. And begin to wonder. In their own quiet way. The light fades again as evening returns. The desert cools. The sky darkens. And the Sphinx settles once more into shadow. Still. Silent. Watching. Always watching. The desert does not change quickly. Its movements are soft, almost unnoticeable from one day to the next. A small shift in the sand. A faint change in the wind. A quiet difference in the light. But over longer stretches of time, the land slowly becomes something new. Paths appear where none existed before. Stones are worn smooth by passing feet. Familiar places take on new meanings as different people arrive and begin to see them in their own way. So it was with the Sphinx. Long after the first builders were gone, and long after their voices had faded into memory, others began to come. They traveled from distant lands. Some followed the river, moving along its gentle curves. Others crossed wide stretches of dry ground, guided by the stars at night and the sun during the day. They came slowly, step by step, carrying only what they needed. Water, food, simple tools. And when they reached the plateau where the Sphinx rested, they would see it rising from the sand, quiet and still, just as it had always been. For many, this was their first sight of it. They would pause. Not out of fear, but out of a kind of quiet recognition that they had arrived at a place that felt older than anything they had known before. The air around the Sphinx often felt still. Even when the wind moved across the desert, there were moments when everything seemed to settle, as if sound itself had softened. Visitors might walk closer, their footsteps careful, pressing gently into the sand. The scale of the figure would become clearer as they approached. It was larger than it first appeared from a distance, the head alone rising high above them, the paws stretching forward, resting in a position that felt both relaxed and deliberate. They would look up at the face. The expression did not change. It remained calm, untroubled, not welcoming, not rejecting, simply present. And in that presence, people began to form their own ideas. Some believed the Sphinx held knowledge. Not spoken knowledge, not written knowledge, but something quieter. A kind of understanding that existed beyond words. They might stand before it in silence, as if waiting, listening, even though there was nothing to hear. Others saw it as a marker, a sign that this land held something important, something worth remembering, even if the exact reason had been forgotten. They would leave small offerings nearby. Simple things. Food, water, objects made by hand, placed gently on the ground, not with ceremony, but with quiet intention. Over time, these visits became more common. Paths formed naturally as people walked the same routes again and again. The sand pressed down into faint lines, guiding future travelers toward the same place. And with each new visitor, the story of the Sphinx grew. Not through clear records or written accounts, but through shared experience. Through moments of stillness. Through quiet observation. Different groups brought different interpretations. Some connected the Sphinx to the sun. They noticed how it faced the east, how the first light of morning touched its face. To them, this alignment felt meaningful. A sign that the figure was linked to the daily journey of light across the sky. They spoke softly of cycles, of beginnings, of the steady return of day after night. Others focused on its form, the combination of human and animal. They saw strength in the body of the lion, awareness in the human face. Together, these elements suggested something balanced. Something that held both power and calm understanding at once. But no single explanation remained fixed. Each idea shifted slightly as it passed from one person to another. And so, the Sphinx continued to hold its quiet distance from certainty. It allowed these thoughts to exist around it, without confirming or denying any of them. Time moved forward. New generations arrived. Some stayed longer, settling near the area, building simple structures, creating small communities where life could continue at its usual, steady pace. In the early morning, smoke would rise gently from cooking fires. The scent of baked grain would drift through the air. Water would be carried in clay vessels from nearby sources. Children would walk along the edges of the plateau, their footsteps light, their voices soft. And always, in the background, the Sphinx remained. Watching. Its presence did not interrupt the flow of daily life. But it shaped it in quiet ways. People would glance toward it as they worked. Not often. Just enough to remind themselves that it was there. At night, when the sky grew dark and the stars appeared once more, the Sphinx would return to shadow. Its form blending into the surrounding land. Only its outline faintly visible under the dim light of the moon. Visitors who stayed overnight might lie awake for a while, looking out across the desert. Their eyes adjusting slowly to the darkness. Their thoughts moving at an unhurried pace. In those quiet hours, the Sphinx often felt different. Less like a structure. More like a presence. Something that belonged to the stillness of night as much as it did to the brightness of day. The wind would move gently. The temperature would drop. And the silence would deepen. It was in these moments that the mystery seemed to settle more fully. Not as something to be solved, but as something to be experienced. To be felt in the calm space between thoughts. And so, the Sphinx became more than a creation of stone. It became a place where time seemed to slow. Where questions could exist without needing answers. Where the past and the present met quietly, without conflict. And still, the surface of the Sphinx continued to change. Slowly. Almost invisibly. The wind carried sand across its body, softening its edges. Occasionally, small pieces of stone would loosen and fall, landing quietly at its base. The face, once more defined, continued to wear down. Its features becoming gentler. Less precise. But in some ways, more timeless. Because as detail faded, the overall presence remained. Strong. Steady. Unmoved. And the visitors kept coming. Not in large crowds. Not with noise or urgency. But one by one. Or in small groups. Drawn by something they could not fully explain. They would arrive. Pause. Observe. And then, after some time, they would leave again. Carrying with them a memory. A quiet impression. Something that stayed with them long after the desert was no longer in sight. And in this way, the mystery of the Sphinx continued to grow. Not through answers. But through experience. Through the simple act of being there. Of standing in its presence. Of feeling the stillness it offered. The desert remained patient. The sky remained wide. And the Sphinx remained as it had always been. Resting. Watching. Waiting. Evening returns once more. The light softens. The shadows grow longer. And the Sphinx slowly fades back into the calm darkness of the desert night. There is something about a face that draws the human eye. Even in the simplest outline, even in the faintest shape, people notice a face before almost anything else. Two eyes. A nose. A mouth. These familiar forms create a quiet connection. They suggest thought. Presence. Awareness. And so, when people stood before the Sphinx, one of the first mysteries they felt was in the face. The body was immense, stretching low across the stone plateau, broad and grounded like the lion it resembled. But the face was different. The face was human. Calm. Still. Looking outward into the distance. It did not smile. It did not frown. Its expression rested somewhere between those things, balanced and unreadable. That calm expression became one of the Sphinx's greatest mysteries. Who was it meant to resemble? Was it the face of a king? The image of a ruler shaped into stone so that his presence would remain long after his lifetime had ended? Or was it not one person at all, but an ideal face, calm, noble, and timeless, meant to represent something larger than any individual? No one could say for certain. The people who first carved it may have known. They may have looked at the finished face and understood its meaning immediately. To them, it may have carried no mystery at all. But that certainty did not survive. Time wore away the details. Memory softened. And what had once been clear became quiet and uncertain. The stone face changed over the years. Wind moved across it, carrying fine sand that brushed gently against the surface day after day. This happened so slowly that no one could watch it happen. But over long periods, the changes became visible. The lines of the face grew softer. The sharp edges became rounded. The surface became rough in places, worn smooth in others. And still, the expression remained. That same calm, unreadable expression. It gave the Sphinx an unusual feeling. As though it knew something, but did not need to say it. People often searched the face for meaning. They looked at the eyes. Large and fixed on the horizon. The gaze did not meet the viewer. Instead, it looked beyond. Toward something far away. Toward the rising sun. This direction seemed important. Every morning, the first light of day reached the face of the Sphinx. The darkness lifted slowly, and the features emerged from shadow. The forehead caught the light. Then the cheeks. Then the long stone body behind. It happened the same way each morning, calm and predictable. For many who observed this, it felt intentional. The face seemed to greet the dawn. Not with movement, but with silent attention. Some believed this meant the face represented a ruler connected to the sun. Others believed the direction symbolized rebirth. The steady return of light after darkness. A reminder that the world moved in repeating cycles. Day to night. Night to day. Season to season. Life to death. The face, calm and still, watched this cycle endlessly. And that endless gaze added to the mystery. It seemed purposeful. Yet the purpose remained hidden. There was another detail that deepened the mystery. The nose was gone. Where once the face had been whole, there was now absence. A break in the shape. A missing part that changed the balance of the features. Visitors who saw the Sphinx wondered how this happened. Did the nose fall away slowly, weakened by time? Was it damaged by weather? Or was it broken by human hands? Many ideas emerged. Some imagined a sudden act of destruction. Others believed it was simply the long work of erosion. But certainty never arrived. And because the answer remained unclear, the missing nose became part of the mystery itself. The absence seemed to say as much as the remaining stone. It reminded every visitor that time leaves marks. That even great monuments change. That even something as large and lasting as the Sphinx is not untouched by the passing of years. Yet despite that loss, the face retained its presence. In some ways, the missing features made the expression even more difficult to define. The face became less personal. Less tied to any one individual. It seemed to belong to no one, and to everyone. Its calmness remained. Its silence remained. And the mystery deepened. The head itself appeared large, but not as large as the body below it. This created another question. Had the proportions always been this way? Or had the head been reshaped at some point? Some observers thought the head looked smaller than expected. The body was broad and long, full of strength. The head seemed more modest by comparison. This difference led to quiet speculation. Perhaps the original design had been altered. Perhaps the face seen now was not the first face carved there. Perhaps an earlier form had existed, changed later by careful hands. No one could prove it. The stone held no easy answers. But the possibility remained. And so the face continued to invite wonder. People stood before it and imagined the hands that shaped it. Stone workers standing beneath the sun. Tools striking the limestone. Dust rising in pale clouds. The face slowly emerging from the rock. The eyes carefully carved. The cheeks smoothed. The mouth shaped into its quiet line. Those workers may have known exactly whose face they were creating. They may have worked under clear instructions. They may have understood the meaning behind every line. But their voices are gone. Only the stone remains. And stone does not explain itself. It keeps its secrets. Visitors often found themselves staring at the face longer than they expected. There was no movement. No expression changing over time. And yet the face held attention. It seemed peaceful. Yet powerful. Gentle. Yet distant. That balance was difficult to describe. It created a feeling that words could not fully capture. A sense that the face represented something important, even if the exact meaning had been lost. The mystery did not come from complexity. The features were simple. The gaze was steady. The expression was calm. And yet that simplicity left room for endless thought. Because the face did not tell the viewer what to think. It allowed each person to bring their own meaning. One visitor might see wisdom. Another might see authority. Another might feel comfort. Another might feel awe. The same stone face offered something slightly different to each person. And in that way, the mystery remained alive. Not locked in the past, but renewed with every new set of eyes. The desert around the Sphinx remained quiet. Wind moved softly across the plateau. Light shifted through the day. The sky changed color with the passing hours. And the face remained. Watching the sun rise. Watching the shadows lengthen. Watching the stars return each night. Always the same. Always silent. As years became centuries, the face became a symbol of endurance. It had outlasted those who built it. It had outlasted the stories that explained it. It had outlasted memory itself. And because it remained when so much else had faded, its silence grew more powerful. A silent face in the desert. Calm. Patient. Unanswered. That is what made it mysterious. Not because it hid its secrets aggressively, but because it held them gently. Quietly. Without resistance. The face in the stone asked nothing. It demanded nothing. It simply remained. And people, seeing that calm expression, could not help but wonder. Who are you? What do you mean? What have you seen? The Sphinx never answered. Its eyes remained fixed on the horizon. Its expression remained unchanged. And the desert wind continued to move softly over the ancient stone. Night comes again. The last light fades from the face. Its features soften into shadow. And once more, the Sphinx watches in silence. There are times when the desert feels almost empty. Not in a lonely way, but in a quiet, open way. A space where nothing presses too closely, where the land stretches wide and the sky seems even wider. In these moments, the smallest changes become noticeable. A faint line in the sand. A ripple shaped by the wind. A shadow that moves slowly as the sun crosses the sky. And among these gentle changes, the Sphinx remains, as it always has. Yet there were long periods when much of it could not be seen. The desert has a way of covering things. Not suddenly, not all at once, but gradually. Grain by grain, carried by the wind, settling softly into place. The sand does not fall with force. It drifts. It gathers. It rests. Over time, it can rise higher and higher, until what once stood clear becomes hidden beneath a smooth, quiet surface. This happened to the Sphinx many times. The body, long and low, was especially vulnerable to this slow covering. At first, the sand would gather around the base. Then around the paws. then higher, along the sides. Each day, the change was small. Almost impossible to notice. But over months, over years, the shape of the land would shift. The Sphinx would begin to disappear. Visitors arriving during these times would not see the full form. They would see only the head rising above the sand. A face emerging from the earth. Calm. Still. Unmoving. The rest of the body hidden beneath layers of soft, pale grains. This partial view created a different kind of mystery. Without the full shape visible, the Sphinx seemed less like a creature and more like a presence. A head without a body. A watcher without movement. It appeared as though it had risen from beneath the ground and paused there, looking outward. People who saw it in this state may have felt a quiet sense of wonder. How much of it lies beneath? How far does it extend? What shape is hidden under the sand? These questions were not easy to answer. The sand concealed everything gently, without revealing what it covered. Some may have tried to clear small areas, using hands or simple tools to brush away the surface. But the desert is patient. What is moved in one moment can return in another. The wind continues its steady work, bringing more sand, smoothing it again, covering what has been uncovered. And so, for long stretches of time, the Sphinx existed in two forms: the seen and the unseen. The visible head, watching quietly, and the hidden body, resting beneath. This dual nature added depth to its mystery. It was not only what people could see that made it remarkable. It was also what they could not see. The unseen invites imagination. It creates space for thought. People may have pictured the body beneath in different ways. Some imagined it perfectly preserved, untouched by time. Others imagined it worn and softened, like the face above. Some believed there might be spaces within. Hidden chambers carved into the stone. Places that could hold objects, or messages, or something left behind by those who built it. These ideas did not come from clear evidence. They came from the simple fact that much of the Sphinx remained out of sight. And where sight ends, imagination begins. Years passed in this quiet state. The head visible. The body hidden. The desert continuing its slow, endless movement. Then, at certain times, people returned with greater effort. They came not only to observe, but to uncover. Groups of workers gathered near the base of the Sphinx, carrying tools. Simple at first. Wooden handles. Metal edges. Baskets for carrying sand away. They worked carefully. Not quickly. The sand was removed little by little. Lifted and carried. Set aside. Each small effort revealing a bit more of the stone beneath. The pause began to appear again. Large. Solid. Resting exactly where they had always been. More sand was cleared. The sides of the body emerged. The long shape returning to view. It was a slow process. The kind that required patience more than strength. And as more of the Sphinx was revealed, its full presence returned. The body connected again to the head. The form complete. The lion shape clear once more. People who saw it fully uncovered may have felt a different kind of stillness. A sense of seeing something whole. Something that had been hidden, now gently returned to view. But even as it was uncovered, the mystery did not fade. If anything, it deepened. Because with more of the Sphinx visible, new questions appeared. The surface of the body showed marks. Lines and textures shaped by time. Some areas smoother. Others more rough. These patterns seemed to tell a story. But the story was not easy to read. Was it shaped only by wind? Only by sand? Or had water once touched this stone long ago? Some observers noticed that certain marks looked like they had been worn by flowing water. Gentle, rounded grooves that seemed different from the sharper patterns left by sand and wind. This led to quiet speculation. Could the Sphinx be older than believed? Could it have stood through a time when the climate was different? When rain fell more often? When water moved across the land in ways that no longer happen? These thoughts did not come with clear answers. They remained possibilities. Ideas held softly, without certainty. And so, the uncovered body did not resolve the mystery. It expanded it. The more that was seen, the more there was to consider. And still, beneath even the visible stone, there may have been more. The ground beneath the Sphinx remained largely untouched. Solid. Quiet. Unrevealed. Some imagined that below the surface, there might be passages. Rooms carved into the rock. Spaces hidden from view for thousands of years. Others believed the Sphinx was exactly what it appeared to be. A single, solid form. Carved directly from the limestone, without hidden interiors. Both ideas remained. Neither confirmed. Neither denied. The Sphinx did not offer clarity. It allowed these possibilities to exist side by side. The desert, once again, continued its quiet cycle. Even after being uncovered, the sand would begin to return. Slowly. Softly. Grain by grain. The wind does not stop. It does not hurry. It simply continues. And so the Sphinx remains in a gentle balance. Between being revealed and being hidden. Between what is known and what is imagined. Between presence and mystery. Visitors still come. They walk along the same paths. They stand before the great stone figure. They look at the face. They look at the body. They notice the marks. The patterns. The way the light moves across the surface. And often, they feel the same quiet thought. There is more here than can be seen. More than can be easily understood. The Sphinx rests in that space. Not asking to be solved. Not needing explanation. Simply existing as it always has. A shape in the desert. A presence in the silence. Partly revealed. Partly hidden. Always watching. The evening settles once more. The sand cools beneath the fading light. The outlines soften. And the Sphinx, whether seen fully or partly concealed, returns again to shadow. Time moves in a quiet way in the desert. It does not rush forward. It does not leave clear marks that can be easily counted. Instead, it settles gently into everything, shaping the land little by little. Stone softens. Edges fade. Surfaces change in ways that can only be noticed when many years have passed. And so, when people began to look more closely at the Sphinx, one of the deepest mysteries they felt was not only who built it, or why it was made, but something even more quiet and distant. How old is it? At first, this question seems simple. But like many things connected to the Sphinx, it does not remain simple for long. The people who lived near the Sphinx in its earliest days may have known the answer clearly. They may have spoken of its creation as something recent, something tied to the life of a ruler or a moment in time. But as generations passed, those clear memories faded. Stories changed. Details softened. And eventually, the exact moment of its creation became uncertain. Later observers looked at the Sphinx and tried to understand its age through what they could see. They studied the stone, the way it had worn down, the patterns carved into its surface by wind and sand. They looked at the surrounding land, the structures nearby, the alignment with the sun. All of these offered small clues, but none gave a complete answer. Some believed the Sphinx was built during a time of great construction, when large stone structures rose from the plateau nearby. They saw similarities in the style, in the materials, in the way the stone had been shaped and placed. To them, the Sphinx belonged to that same period, a part of a larger vision, a piece of a world where human effort and careful design created lasting forms in stone. This idea felt steady. It connected the Sphinx to something known, something understood. But others looked more closely at the surface of the Sphinx itself. They noticed the marks along the body, the gentle curves and grooves, the way some areas seemed to have been worn by something different from wind alone. These patterns suggested the possibility of water. Not the slow brushing of sand carried by air, but the flowing movement of rain or runoff. Water leaves a different kind of mark. It smooths in curves. It shapes in vertical lines. It settles into low places and moves downward, guided by gravity. Some parts of the Sphinx appeared to show this kind of wear. And this observation led to a quiet, thoughtful question. If water shaped these surfaces, when did that water exist? The desert, as it is now, does not receive much rain. The air is dry. The sky remains clear for long stretches. Water does not move across the stone in the same way it might have in a different climate. So if the Sphinx carries signs of water erosion, it suggests a time when the environment may have been different. A time when rain was more common. When the land may have been greener, softer, less dry than it is today. This possibility opens a wider view of time, a deeper stretch of years, perhaps far earlier than the period most commonly associated with the Sphinx. But this idea remains uncertain. Not all observers agree on what the marks mean. Some believe the patterns can still be explained by wind and sand over long periods. They see the effects of erosion as part of the natural aging of stone in a desert environment. They suggest that time alone, working slowly and steadily, can create complex patterns without the need for water. And so, two quiet perspectives exist side by side. One that sees the Sphinx as part of a known era of construction. Another that considers the possibility of a more distant past. Neither view fully replaces the other. Both are held gently, without final conclusion. And the Sphinx remains between them, holding its silence, keeping its age just out of reach. There are other ways people have tried to understand its time. They have looked at the stars, the way the Sphinx faces the east, the way it aligns with the rising sun. Some have wondered if this direction connects to specific points in the sky from long ago. Moments when certain stars rose in particular positions. Moments that could be traced backward through careful observation. The sky, after all, moves in slow cycles. Patterns shift over thousands of years. Stars rise in different places over time. And by studying these movements, some believe it may be possible to estimate when the Sphinx was first shaped. But this method, too, carries uncertainty. The connections are not exact. The interpretations vary. And the sky itself offers many possible alignments, not just one. So again, the answer does not settle into place. It remains open, quiet, unresolved. The question of age is not only about numbers. It is about distance. How far back in time the Sphinx reaches. How many generations have stood before it? How many sunrises it has watched. If it was built thousands of years ago, that is already a long stretch of time. Difficult to fully imagine. But if it is older than that, if it reaches back even further, then it becomes something even more distant. Something that belongs not just to history, but to the edge of memory itself. And yet, when standing before the Sphinx, time does not feel heavy. It does not press down with weight. Instead, it feels quiet, soft, almost gentle. The stone does not rush to reveal its past. It does not insist on being understood. It simply remains, allowing each observer to feel time in their own way. Some may look at it and think of ancient builders. Others may think of long stretches of natural change. Others may simply feel the stillness of something that has been present for a very long time. All of these thoughts exist together. None cancel the others. The Sphinx holds them all without preference. As the sun moves across the sky, the light changes how the surface appears. In the morning, the stone glows softly. In the afternoon, shadows deepen the lines and textures. In the evening, the colors warm and then fade. These shifting lights reveal different details, different patterns, different hints of age. But none of them provide a final answer. They only offer small glimpses, small suggestions. And so, the mystery remains. Not as something frustrating, but as something peaceful. A question that does not need to be solved in order to be appreciated. The Sphinx has stood through time without explaining itself. It has allowed the years to pass without marking them clearly. It has become a place where time feels wide and open, rather than measured and fixed. And perhaps that is part of its meaning. Not to define time, but to exist beyond simple measures of it. To remind those who stand before it that some things are not easily placed within a single moment. That some things stretch quietly across many generations. The desert continues its slow rhythm. The wind moves. The sand shifts. The sky remains vast and calm. And the Sphinx remains, holding its age within the stone. Unspoken. Uncertain. Endlessly present. The light softens once more. Evening settles gently over the land. The details fade into shadow. And the question of time drifts quietly into the night, unanswered, yet undisturbed. In the quiet presence of the Sphinx, there is more than stone. There is shape. There is intention. There is a form that seems carefully chosen, even if its meaning is no longer fully known. A lion's body. A human face. Together, they create something that does not exist in nature, yet feels strangely familiar. This combination is one of the Sphinx's most enduring mysteries. Why this form? Why bring together these two very different beings into one single figure? The lion rests low against the ground. Its body is long, steady, and strong. Even in stillness, it suggests quiet power. Not the kind that moves quickly or suddenly, but the kind that remains. Patient. Grounded. Enduring. The lion does not need to prove its strength. It simply has it. And in the shape of the Sphinx, that strength is stretched across the stone plateau, calm and unmoving. The paws extend forward. Not in motion. Not in tension. But in rest. This posture feels deliberate. A position of watchfulness, rather than action. The lion's body is not prepared to leap. It is prepared to remain. And above that body, the human face rises. Calm. Composed. Looking outward. The face does not carry the wildness of the lion. It carries something quieter. A sense of awareness, of thought, of presence. This blending of animal and human qualities creates a balance that feels meaningful. Strength below, awareness above, earth and mind together. For some who have stood before the Sphinx, this form suggests harmony. A union between physical power and calm understanding. A reminder that strength does not need to be loud. That awareness does not need to be shown through movement. Together, they can exist in stillness. Others have seen the form differently. They have imagined the Sphinx as a guardian. A figure placed at the edge of something important. Something worth protecting. In this view, the lion's body provides the strength to defend. The human face provides the awareness to watch. Together, they form a silent protector. One that does not move, yet remains always present. Always attentive. The idea of guarding something unseen adds another layer to the mystery. What might lie beyond? What might have once existed nearby? The Sphinx faces outward, toward the horizon. Its gaze does not fall upon anything immediately visible. It looks past the present moment, as if watching something that exists at a distance. This direction may hold meaning, or it may simply be part of the design. But the feeling it creates is quiet and steady. A sense that the Sphinx is not focused on what is close, but on what is far. Some have considered whether the form of the Sphinx connects to beliefs that once existed in the land around it. Beliefs about life, death, and what lies beyond. The human face may represent the conscious self. The part that thinks, observes, and understands. The lion's body may represent the natural world. The physical strength of the earth. Together, they may have symbolized a connection between these two aspects of existence. But these ideas remain gentle possibilities. They are not fixed answers. They are ways of looking. Ways of feeling. The original meaning, if it was ever clearly defined, has softened over time. Like the stone itself, shaped slowly by wind and years. And yet, the form continues to speak in its own quiet way. Not through words, but through presence. The balance of the Sphinx's shape creates a kind of calm. It does not feel chaotic. It does not feel random. Everything appears placed with care. The length of the body. The height of the head. The position of the paws. All of it contributes to a sense of stillness. A stillness that feels intentional. People who spend time near the Sphinx often begin to notice small details. The way shadows gather beneath the chin as the sun moves. The way light traces the curve of the back. The way the ground around the figure feels slightly cooler in the early morning. These details are simple, but they create a quiet connection between the observer and the stone. A sense of being present in the same moment. The Sphinx does not demand attention. It allows attention to settle naturally. Slowly. Without effort. And in that slow attention, the form begins to feel less like an object and more like a presence. Not alive in the way living beings are alive. But not entirely separate from life either. It exists somewhere in between. A shaped part of the earth that holds a quiet awareness. The blending of human and animal also reflects something deeper within human experience. People have always lived close to the natural world. Watching animals. Learning from them. Understanding their movements, their strengths, their ways of being. At the same time, people have always been aware of their own thoughts. Their own sense of self. Their ability to reflect. To remember. To imagine. The Sphinx brings these two worlds together. Not in conflict, but in calm unity. It does not show struggle. It shows balance. And that balance may be part of its lasting presence. Because even without knowing its original meaning, people can feel something in its form. Something steady. Something quiet. Something that does not need to be explained in detail. As time continues to pass, the form of the Sphinx remains recognizable. Even as the surface changes, even as details soften, the overall shape endures. The lion body. The human face. The long, resting posture. These elements stay. They do not fade easily. And because they remain, the mystery remains with them. Each person who sees the Sphinx brings their own understanding. Their own thoughts. Their own quiet interpretations. Some may see strength. Some may see peace. Some may simply feel the stillness. There is no single answer. No final meaning that settles everything into place. And perhaps that is what allows the Sphinx to continue as it does. Open. Unfixed. A form that holds many possibilities at once. The desert around it does not ask for explanations. The sky above does not offer them. And the Sphinx, resting between earth and sky, continues to hold its shape. A shape that feels both simple and deep. Familiar and unknown. Grounded and distant. All at once. The day moves slowly toward evening. The light softens across the stone. The long form of the Sphinx stretches into shadow. And once again, the quiet figure remains, holding its shape, and its meaning, in silence. There is a certain kind of quiet that belongs only to places that have been still for a very long time. It is not the silence of a single moment, but a deeper stillness that seems to gather slowly, layer by layer, over many years. The Sphinx rests within that kind of silence. Not only above the ground, where its shape can be seen, but also beneath it, where the stone meets the earth. What lies below has long been part of the mystery. The visible form of the Sphinx is only one part of its presence. Beneath the surface, the ground remains largely unseen. Solid. Unbroken to the eye. Yet quiet questions have always lingered. Is there more beneath? Is the Sphinx only what can be seen, or does it extend in ways that remain hidden? The stone from which it was carved is part of the plateau itself. A natural rise of limestone, shaped carefully into the form that now rests there. This suggests that the Sphinx is not a separate structure placed upon the land. It is part of the land, connected deeply to the ground beneath it. And still, the idea of hidden spaces continues to return. Not loudly. Not urgently. But gently, like a thought that comes and goes. Some have imagined that there may be chambers beneath the Sphinx. Quiet rooms carved into the rock. Spaces that have remained closed for a very long time. These imagined chambers are often thought of as places of storage. Places where something important might have been kept. Objects. Records. Knowledge shaped into physical form. But these ideas are not confirmed. They are possibilities. Born from the simple fact that much of the earth below remains unseen. The ground does not easily reveal what it holds. It keeps its layers in place. It allows only small glimpses at the surface. And so, the imagination fills the rest. There have been times when people have listened closely to the ground. Not with instruments at first, but with careful attention. Tapping the stone. Feeling for subtle differences. Listening for changes in sound that might suggest empty spaces beneath. Later, more careful methods were used. Gentle ways of sensing what lies below without disturbing the surface too much. These efforts did not bring clear, simple answers. They suggested variations, differences in density, small hints that the ground beneath is not perfectly uniform. But these hints do not form a complete picture. They do not reveal clear rooms or passages. They remain soft indications, open to interpretation. And so the mystery continues. There is something about hidden space that invites quiet curiosity. A space that cannot be seen feels different from one that can. It carries a sense of depth, of possibility, of something waiting, even if nothing is truly there. The Sphinx, resting above such a space, becomes more than its visible form. It becomes a boundary. A place where what is known meets what is not known. Where the surface meets the unseen. This boundary is not sharp. It is gentle. Like the line where light fades into shadow at the end of the day. The Sphinx sits within that transition. Partly revealed. Partly concealed. The idea of hidden chambers is not only about physical space. It also reflects a deeper feeling. The sense that the past itself holds layers. That not everything is immediately visible. That some parts of history remain below the surface, quiet and undisturbed. In this way, the ground beneath the Sphinx becomes a symbol. Not only of what might physically exist there, but of what remains unknown in a broader sense. The unseen past. The forgotten details. The quiet spaces where memory has faded. People who stand near the Sphinx often feel this depth, even without thinking about it directly. It is part of the atmosphere. A feeling that the place holds more than can be easily observed. That there is a stillness not only in the air, but in the ground itself. The desert contributes to this feeling. Its surface shifts often. But beneath the top layers of sand, the earth remains firm. Stable. Holding its shape over long periods. This contrast between movement above and stillness below adds to the quiet sense of mystery. The wind moves. The sand drifts. But beneath it all, something remains unchanged. The Sphinx is connected to that stillness. It rises from it. It rests upon it. It returns to it when the sand covers its body once more. This connection makes the idea of hidden space feel natural. As if the Sphinx belongs not only to the visible world, but also to the quiet depth beneath. There is no clear boundary where one ends and the other begins. They exist together. Intertwined. As the sun moves across the sky, the light reveals the surface in different ways. Small cracks. Subtle lines. Textures that hint at the passage of time. But none of these reveal what lies below. They remain surface details. Clues that point to age, but not to hidden spaces. And so, the mystery remains soft. Unresolved. Not pressing for an answer. The Sphinx does not open. It does not reveal hidden doors or pathways. It remains closed. Complete in its silence. And that silence allows the imagination to rest. There is no need to force a conclusion. No need to decide what must be beneath. It is enough to acknowledge that not everything is visible. That some parts of the world remain unseen. The Sphinx, in its stillness, seems to accept this naturally. It does not resist the unknown. It holds it gently. As part of its presence. Visitors often leave with this quiet sense of depth. Not a clear answer, but a feeling. A calm awareness that some mysteries do not need to be solved in order to be meaningful. That the unseen can exist alongside the seen without conflict. That silence can hold as much as sound. As night approaches, the ground cools. The air becomes softer. The light fades slowly. And the Sphinx, resting above whatever lies beneath, returns again to shadow. Its surface disappears into darkness. Its form blends with the land. And beneath it all, the quiet earth remains. Still. Unrevealed. At rest. The stars begin to appear once more. The desert settles into night. And the Sphinx, above and below, remains wrapped in silence. The desert is always moving, even when it appears still. The movement is gentle. So gentle that it often goes unnoticed. A small shift in the sand. A faint change in the shape of a dune. A thin layer of dust settling quietly over stone. These changes happen without sound. Without urgency. And yet, over long stretches of time, they shape everything. The Sphinx rests within this slow movement. It does not resist it. It does not change suddenly. But it is always being touched by the desert. The wind is a constant presence. Sometimes it moves softly, barely felt against the skin. Other times, it grows stronger, carrying fine grains of sand through the air. These grains are small. Almost weightless. But when they move again and again across the same surface, they begin to leave marks. Not deep marks. Not sudden cuts. But soft changes. Edges become smoother. Lines become less defined. The surface begins to feel worn, not broken. The face of the Sphinx shows this clearly. The features, once more precise, have softened over time. The cheeks no longer hold sharp detail. The lips are less defined. The eyes, though still present, have lost some of their original clarity. And yet, the expression remains. Calm. Steady. Unchanged in feeling, even as the details shift. This is the quiet work of time. Not destructive in a sudden way, but transformative over long periods. The body of the Sphinx also carries these signs. The long back, the sides, the paws, each surface has been touched by wind and sand. Some areas appear smoother, as if gently polished. Others are rough, where the stone has weathered in uneven ways. These patterns do not form quickly. They take years. Centuries. Perhaps even longer. And because they take so long, they carry a sense of patience. The desert does not hurry. It allows change to happen slowly. Almost without being noticed. There are times when the wind grows stronger. It moves across the plateau with more force, lifting sand into the air and carrying it farther. During these moments, the Sphinx is surrounded by motion. Fine particles brush against its surface, moving in small, repeated paths. The sound is soft. A faint whisper, barely heard. But the effect continues. Little by little, the stone responds. Not in resistance, but in quiet acceptance. This relationship between wind and stone is ongoing. It has no beginning that can be clearly seen, and no end that can be easily imagined. It is simply part of the environment. Part of the way the desert exists. The Sphinx, being part of the land, shares in this process. It does not stand apart from nature. It is shaped by it. At the same time, the Sphinx also shapes the space around it. The presence of its large form changes how the wind moves nearby. Air flows differently around its body. Sand gathers in certain places. Clears in others. Small patterns form at its base, shifting with each passing day. These patterns are temporary. They change quickly compared to the slow wearing of stone. But they are part of the ongoing interaction between the Sphinx and its surroundings. Light also plays a role in this quiet transformation. As the sun moves across the sky, it warms the surface of the stone. The temperature rises during the day and falls again at night. This steady cycle of heating and cooling affects the stone over time. Small expansions. Small contractions. Movements so slight they cannot be seen. But repeated over many years, they contribute to the gradual change in the surface. Cracks may form. Tiny at first. Then slowly widening. Not enough to break the structure, but enough to alter its texture. These natural processes do not erase the Sphinx. They reshape it. They soften its features. They blend it more closely with the land from which it was carved. In this way, the Sphinx becomes less like a separate object and more like a part of the desert itself. A form that rises from the earth and slowly returns to it. Visitors who look closely can see these effects. They may run their eyes along the surface, noticing the uneven textures. The places where the stone feels worn. The areas where the color has changed slightly. These observations do not reveal exact answers. But they tell a quiet story. A story of time passing without interruption. A story of nature continuing its work without pause. There is something calming in this kind of change. It is not sudden. It is not harsh. It does not demand attention. It simply happens. Slowly. Steadily. Without effort. The Sphinx, in its stillness, reflects this pace. It does not rush. It does not react. It allows time to move through it, shaping it gently. And in doing so, it becomes a reminder of a different way of experiencing time. Not as something to measure or control, but as something to move within. Something to observe quietly. The marks left by wind and time are not flaws. They are part of the Sphinx's presence. They show that it has endured. That it has remained through countless days and nights. Through shifting seasons. Through changing conditions. Each mark is a small trace of that endurance. A sign that the Sphinx has not been frozen in a single moment, but has continued to exist, adapting slowly to the world around it. The mystery of the Sphinx is not only in its origin. It is also in its continuation. In the way it remains while everything around it changes. In the way it changes, even while appearing still. This balance between stillness and change is quiet, subtle, easy to overlook. But once noticed, it becomes part of the experience of standing before the Sphinx. A feeling that time is present, not as a force, but as a gentle movement. The desert continues its work. The wind moves. The sand shifts. The light changes. And the Sphinx remains at the center of it all. Not resisting. Not guiding. Simply being. As the day fades once more, the light softens across the worn stone. The textures become less visible. The details blend into shadow. And the Sphinx, shaped slowly by wind and time, rests again in the quiet darkness of the desert night. There is a quiet feeling that comes from looking far into the distance. A sense of space. A sense of time stretching outward. The horizon holds that feeling. It is always there, just beyond reach, where the earth and sky seem to meet in a soft and distant line. The Sphinx has faced that line for as long as it has existed. Its gaze does not wander. It does not shift. It remains fixed toward the east, where each day begins. This steady direction is one of its most subtle mysteries. Why this orientation? Why this constant attention toward the place where the sun rises? Each morning, the first light appears gently. A pale glow spreads across the edge of the world. The sky slowly brightens. The colors shift from deep blue into soft shades of gold and rose. And as that light grows, it reaches the Sphinx. The face receives it first. The forehead brightens. Then the cheeks. Then the rest of the form emerges from shadow. This daily moment happens without interruption. Day after day. Year after year. For as long as the Sphinx has remained, it has greeted the sunrise. Not with movement. Not with change. But with quiet presence. This repeated meeting between light and stone feels meaningful. It suggests intention. A careful choice made by those who shaped the figure. They may have aligned it deliberately, placing it so that it would always face the beginning of the day. The rising sun has long been a symbol of renewal. A gentle return of light after darkness. A steady reminder that each night is followed by morning. This rhythm is simple, reliable, comforting. And the Sphinx, facing this rhythm, seems to participate in it. It does not move through time as people do. It does not experience the passing of days in the same way. But it remains present for each one. Watching the light return. Watching it fade again. This endless observation gives the Sphinx a quiet sense of continuity. A feeling that it exists across many moments at once. Not tied to any single day, but present in all of them. Some have imagined that the Sphinx was placed as a kind of watcher. Not of people. Not of events. But of the natural cycles themselves. The rising and setting of the sun. The changing position of the stars. The slow movement of the sky. In this view, the Sphinx becomes a silent observer of time as it unfolds. It does not record. It does not measure. But it remains there, constant, as everything else shifts around it. The horizon, always just beyond reach, adds to this feeling. It represents distance. Possibility. The unknown. The Sphinx, looking toward it, seems to be connected to that sense of openness. As if it is aware of something far beyond the immediate land. Something that lies at the edge of sight. Visitors who stand before the Sphinx often find their own gaze drawn in the same direction. Outward. Toward the horizon. Toward the space where the sky meets the earth. In that shared direction, there is a quiet connection. Between the observer and the stone figure. Both looking outward. Both resting in the same moment. This simple alignment creates a sense of calm. There is no need to look everywhere. No need to search in many directions. The focus is gentle. Steady. Forward. The Sphinx does not turn. It does not adjust. It remains aligned with this single view. And in that stillness, it offers a kind of quiet guidance. Not through instruction, but through presence. A reminder that sometimes it is enough to simply look ahead. To observe. To remain steady. The horizon also changes throughout the day. In the morning, it glows softly with the rising light. At midday, it becomes brighter, clearer, more defined. In the evening, it warms again, then slowly fades into shadow. At night, it disappears completely, blending into the dark. The Sphinx faces all of these changes without reaction. Its gaze remains the same. Its expression does not shift. And yet, the world before it transforms again and again. This contrast between the unchanging and the changing deepens the mystery. The Sphinx does not follow the movement of the sun. It does not track the stars. It does not respond to the shifting light. It simply remains. And in doing so, it becomes a quiet anchor. A point of stillness in a world of motion. There is something comforting in that stillness. Something that feels steady and reliable. In a landscape that changes slowly but constantly, the Sphinx offers a sense of continuity. A presence that does not drift. Does not fade quickly. Does not move away. Even as time passes, even as the surface of the stone wears down, the orientation remains. The gaze stays fixed. The direction does not change. And so, the Sphinx continues to face the horizon, just as it always has. Watching the beginning of each day. Watching the slow passage of light. Watching the endless cycle of time. The reason for this orientation may never be fully known. It may have been chosen for a specific purpose. Or it may have been part of a broader design that has since been forgotten. But the effect remains. The quiet relationship between the Sphinx and the horizon continues. Unbroken. Unexplained. Yet deeply felt. Visitors often leave with this image in mind. The still figure. The wide desert. The distant line where earth and sky meet. It is a simple image. But it carries a sense of calm. A sense of space. A sense of time stretching gently outward. And the Sphinx, always facing that distance, becomes part of that feeling. Not separate from it, but connected to it. As the day draws to a close, the horizon changes once more. The light softens. The colors fade. The line becomes less distinct. And the Sphinx, still facing forward, remains in place. Its gaze unchanged. Its presence steady. The evening deepens. The horizon disappears into night. And the Sphinx continues to watch, quietly, as it has always done. There is a strange softness to forgotten things. Not sudden loss, but slow fading. Like writing in sand that is slowly touched again and again by wind until the shapes become less clear, then unclear, then almost gone. The Sphinx stands in the middle of that kind of fading. It has remained longer than the names tied to it. Longer than the voices that once spoke about it. Longer than the memories that once explained it. At some point in time, the people who knew its full meaning were no longer there to tell it. Not all at once. But gradually. One generation giving way to the next. Stories being passed along in quieter forms. Details becoming softer each time they were repeated. Until eventually, certainty began to disappear. And what remained was something gentler. Something less exact. The Sphinx itself did not change in that process. Its shape stayed the same. Its position stayed the same. But the understanding around it slowly shifted. Names that once may have been spoken clearly became uncertain. Titles that may have been connected to it lost their original context. Even the reason for its existence began to feel less fixed. This is how memory behaves over long periods. It does not vanish sharply. It drifts. It thins. It becomes something like mist over water in the early morning, still present, but difficult to hold. The Sphinx, in this way, became larger than its story. Or perhaps the story became smaller than the Sphinx. Either way, the connection between the two loosened over time. And in that space between stone and memory, mystery grew quietly. Later generations who saw the Sphinx often tried to reconnect it with meaning. They looked at the surrounding structures. They studied the land. They listened to the stories that still remained, even if only in fragments. Some of these stories suggested royal connections. Others spoke in more symbolic terms. But none could fully bring back the original clarity. It was as if the Sphinx had moved slightly beyond the reach of language. Not because it had changed, but because everything around it had slowly shifted. Even names, when they are not used often, begin to soften. They lose sharpness. They become less precise in memory. The same can happen to entire histories. And so, the Sphinx stands not only as a physical presence, but also as a reminder of how fragile memory can be. How easily it can drift over long stretches of time. How even important things can become quiet. Not erased. Just less certain. There is something peaceful in this kind of fading. It does not feel like loss in a sudden way. It feels more like settling. Like dust gently coming to rest on an old surface. The Sphinx carries that sense. It does not resist being partially remembered. It does not insist on being fully known. It simply remains where it is, allowing memory to move around it. Some who approach it today may feel this directly, even if they do not name it. A sense that they are standing near something older than explanation. Something that exists beyond the full reach of story. They may hear fragments of interpretation. Different ideas spoken softly over time. But none of these ideas fully settle into certainty. They remain nearby. Like echoes that do not fully resolve. And so, the Sphinx becomes a place where memory and mystery meet. Not in conflict, but in coexistence. One fading gently, the other remaining quietly. The land around it has changed many times. But the Sphinx has stayed. And because it has stayed, it has absorbed all the changes in silence. The passing of people. The shifting of cultures. The slow transformation of language. All of it moving around the same still form. Over long periods, this creates a unique kind of presence. A presence that feels less like an object from a single moment in time, and more like something that has passed through many moments without leaving them behind. The Sphinx does not hold names in a clear way. It does not repeat them. It does not preserve them in visible form. But it exists alongside them, even as they fade. In that sense, it becomes a kind of quiet witness to forgetting itself. Not active forgetting, but natural fading. The kind that happens when time moves forward without interruption. When stories are not actively preserved in precise detail. When memory relies more on feeling than on exact record. And yet, even as names become uncertain, the Sphinx remains strongly present. Its form does not weaken with memory. It does not depend on names to exist. It stands independently. A shape in the landscape that continues regardless of what is remembered about it. This creates a gentle contrast. The fading of human certainty. The endurance of stone. And between them, a space where mystery lives comfortably. Not as something that demands resolution, but as something that coexists with time itself. Visitors may not think of forgotten names directly when they stand before it, but they may feel the absence of something unspoken. A sense that there is more behind the stone than can be easily reached. Not hidden in a dramatic way, but softened by time. Like writing partially erased by wind. Still there, but not fully legible. And perhaps that is part of what gives the Sphinx its lasting presence. It does not rely on complete understanding. It does not require full clarity. It allows uncertainty to exist without tension. It remains, even when memory does not fully follow. As the sun moves across the sky again, light falls across its surface in familiar ways. Shadows gather. Then shift. Then fade. The stone continues to hold its shape through all of it. And the names, the stories, the details that once surrounded it, continue their quiet movement through time. Some becoming softer. Some disappearing from active memory. some remaining in fragments. And the Sphinx remains at the center of that slow, gentle change. Not as something fully known. Not as something fully lost. But as something that exists between remembering and forgetting. A presence that holds space for both. Night returns again to the desert. The air cools. The sky deepens. And the Sphinx rests in silence, carrying both memory and mystery into the darkness. Night in the desert feels different from night in other places. It does not feel enclosed. There are no walls, no tight corners, no distant sounds bouncing back from nearby surfaces. Instead, there is space. Wide, open, and still. The sky stretches endlessly above, filled with quiet stars that do not seem to move, even though they are always slowly shifting. And beneath that sky, the Sphinx remains. Its form becomes softer at night. Not changing, but blending into the surrounding darkness. The outlines of the lion body fade first. Then the face becomes less distinct. Only the general shape remains visible for a while, before even that begins to merge with the land. And yet, even when it is difficult to see, its presence does not feel diminished. It feels steady. As if the darkness itself knows where it is. This is part of what makes the Sphinx feel different from ordinary objects. It does not rely on visibility alone. It seems to exist even when it cannot be clearly seen. As if it is remembered by the land itself. The night wind moves gently across the plateau. It does not carry urgency. It does not press or force. It simply passes through, touching everything in its path. Stone. Sand. Open air. The Sphinx receives this wind without reaction. It does not shift. It does not respond. It remains exactly as it has been. And in that stillness, something subtle becomes noticeable. The idea of endurance. Not loud endurance. Not dramatic endurance. But quiet endurance. The kind that continues without effort. Without recognition. Without need for attention. The Sphinx has endured not only physical time, but also all the changes around it. Changes in land. Changes in people. Changes in language. Changes in understanding. Through all of this, it has stayed in place. Not resisting. Not moving away. Simply remaining. Stone is often thought of as permanent. But even stone changes slowly. The surface of the Sphinx shows this clearly. It carries the marks of long exposure. The gentle smoothing of wind. The subtle shaping of sand. The quiet shifts of temperature between day and night. None of these forces act quickly. None of them break the form in a single moment. Instead, they shape it gradually. Like time itself made visible. And because these changes are slow, they are often easy to overlook. But when looked at over long stretches of time, they become significant. The Sphinx is not frozen. It is not untouched. It is something that has been in continuous interaction with its environment. A long conversation between stone and desert. One speaking in silence. The other responding in silence. And yet, over time, a shared shape emerges from that interaction. A form that belongs to both. The Sphinx also carries a kind of memory that is not written. Not spoken. Not recorded in any direct way. But held in its presence. A memory of being there for a long time. Of existing through countless days and nights. Of witnessing the slow movement of the world without participating in it directly. This kind of memory is not detailed. It does not contain events or specific moments. Instead, it is more like atmosphere. A feeling of accumulated time. When people stand before it, they may sense this without needing to think about it. A quiet awareness that the figure before them has been present through far more than can be easily imagined. This awareness often brings a stillness in return. Visitors may speak less, move more slowly, pause longer than expected. Not because they are instructed to, but because the environment encourages it. The Sphinx does not ask for attention, but it naturally holds it. In the stillness of the night, this feeling becomes even stronger. With fewer distractions, the sense of presence deepens. The surrounding desert becomes quieter. The wind becomes softer. The sky becomes more expansive. And the Sphinx remains at the center of this calm. Not as a focus that demands observation, but as a point that simply exists within it. Over time, endurance becomes part of its meaning. Not endurance in the sense of effort, but endurance in the sense of continuity. Of remaining present through change. Of holding form across shifting conditions. This is not something the Sphinx declares. It is something that becomes visible only through time itself. Through repeated observation. Through the passing of seasons. Through the gradual accumulation of years. And perhaps this is why it continues to draw attention. Not because it changes dramatically, but because it does not. In a world where almost everything shifts in some way, the Sphinx offers a rare kind of consistency. A presence that does not move away, even as everything around it does. The stars above it change positions across long cycles. The wind patterns shift with seasons. The sand moves and reshapes itself endlessly. But the Sphinx remains anchored. A fixed point within a moving world. This does not make it separate from change. It makes it part of a different rhythm of change. A slower one. A quieter one. One that is measured in centuries rather than moments. As the night deepens further, even this sense of observation begins to soften. The Sphinx blends more fully into the darkness. Its edges disappear. Its shape becomes part of the land again. And yet, the awareness of its presence remains. Not as sight, but as understanding. A quiet acknowledgement that it is still there. Still resting. Still enduring. And in that final stillness of night, the desert feels complete in its simplicity. Sky above. Stone below. Wind passing gently between them. The Sphinx holds its place within that space. Not changing. Not leaving. Just continuing. And as the night stretches onward, the silence around it becomes even deeper. Not empty, but full of quiet time. And the Sphinx remains within it, as it always has. There is something about silence that invites thought. Not loud thought, not hurried thought, but the kind that moves slowly, like water finding its way through soft ground. The Sphinx has always existed within that kind of silence. And because of that, it has also existed within imagination. Over long stretches of time, people have stood before it and filled the quiet space around it with their own reflections. Not because the Sphinx asked for it, but because it left room for it. The stone does not speak. It does not explain. It does not interrupt. It simply remains. And in that remaining, it becomes a kind of mirror for the mind. Not a mirror that shows the face, but one that reflects thought itself. People who come to the Sphinx bring their own understanding of the world with them. Their own questions. Their own sense of what is possible. Some arrive with a desire for clear answers. Others arrive with no expectations at all. But almost all of them find that the experience is less about receiving information, and more about observing themselves in relation to something very old and very still. The Sphinx does not guide these thoughts. It does not shape them directly. It simply holds its presence, and in doing so, it allows thought to slow down, to soften, to stretch outward instead of rushing forward. In that slower space, imagination begins to take gentle form. People may begin to picture the world around the Sphinx as it once was. Not in exact detail, but in atmosphere. A softer desert. A different sky. A time when the land felt slightly less distant from human life. Others may imagine the hands that shaped it. The quiet rhythm of work. Stone being carved slowly. Dust rising and settling again. Tools moving in steady repetition under the warm light. These images are not confirmed memories. They are reflections. Thoughts that arise in the quiet space the Sphinx creates. And they do not conflict with one another. Different visitors may imagine entirely different things, yet still stand in the same place, looking at the same stone. This shared but unspoken experience is part of what makes the Sphinx unusual. It does not define its meaning in a fixed way. It allows meaning to form gently in the mind of each observer. Like sand taking shape around a still object. Changing with time. Changing with perspective. There are moments when the Sphinx feels almost like it is listening. Not in the sense of hearing words, but in the sense of receiving attention without response. People often speak more softly near it, even when there is no reason to lower their voice. There is a natural quiet that forms around it, as if the surrounding space itself encourages calm. This quiet does not come from the Sphinx actively doing anything. It comes from its stillness, from its long refusal to move, from its steady presence across time. In many places, silence feels empty. But here, silence feels full. Not full of sound, but full of time. Full of history that is no longer spoken aloud. Full of moments that have already passed but still feel close. And in that fullness, imagination becomes more active, not less. Because when there is less external noise, inner thought becomes clearer. The Sphinx becomes a place where thought can slow down without pressure. Where questions can exist without needing immediate answers. Where uncertainty is not uncomfortable, but simply present. Some people may imagine conversations that never happened. Others may imagine meanings that were never intended. Others may simply sit and observe, allowing their thoughts to move without direction. All of these responses exist together in the same space. None are forced. None are corrected. The Sphinx does not respond differently to each one. It remains the same. Still. Open. Unchanging in its silence. And this is where one of its quietest mysteries lies. Not in what it is, but in what it allows. It allows interpretation without correction. It allows imagination without limitation. It allows presence without explanation. Over time, this creates a unique kind of relationship between stone and observer. Not one of instruction, but one of coexistence. The Sphinx exists, and the human mind responds. In this exchange, meaning is never fixed. It continues to shift gently, like light moving across sand throughout the day. Morning brings one impression. Afternoon brings another. Evening changes it again. Night softens it further. And none of these impressions cancel each other out. They simply exist at different moments. The Sphinx remains at the center of this quiet shifting. Not changing itself, but allowing change to happen around it. This is part of why it continues to feel alive in a way that is difficult to describe. Not alive in movement, but alive in presence. A presence that does not fade when it is not being observed closely. A presence that does not require interpretation to exist. As the desert continues its slow rhythm, the Sphinx remains steady within it. The wind passes. The sand shifts. The sky changes color. And thought continues to form and dissolve around the stone. Like waves that never fully settle. And still, the Sphinx remains. Not answering. Not refusing. Simply existing in a way that allows everything else to continue moving. And in that quiet balance between stillness and imagination, its mystery continues to live. Not as something to be solved, but as something to be experienced again and again. The desert grows quieter as the night deepens further. Thought slows. The wind softens. And the Sphinx remains in its place, holding space for silence, memory, and quiet imagination. There are places where time feels like it is breathing. Not quickly. Not unevenly. But slowly, in long, steady intervals that are almost impossible to notice unless you stay still for a very long time. The desert is one of those places. And the Sphinx rests within that slow rhythm, as if it is part of that breath itself. In the morning, the desert seems to inhale light. The sky brightens gradually, as if something distant is opening its eyes. The air warms. The sand begins to glow softly under the rising sun. And the Sphinx emerges again from shadow, as it always does, without change, without effort. Then, as the day moves forward, the desert holds that light for a while. Still. Steady. As if it is resting between breaths. And later, in the evening, the light begins to fade again. Not suddenly. But slowly, like something exhaling gently after a long pause. The shadows stretch across the ground. The colors soften. And the Sphinx returns once more to the quiet tones of dusk. This rhythm repeats endlessly. Day after day. Year after year. It does not hurry. It does not hesitate. It simply continues. And in that repetition, something begins to feel timeless. Not because it never changes, but because the changes are so gradual that they blend into one continuous motion. The Sphinx exists within this motion, but does not follow it like a moving part. It remains still while everything around it flows. That contrast is part of its mystery. How something so still can feel so connected to something so constantly moving. The wind plays a large role in this slow breath of the desert. It arrives without announcement. Sometimes lightly, sometimes with more strength. But always with a kind of patience. It travels across open space, carrying fine grains of sand that move in soft patterns across the ground. These grains do not settle permanently. They shift. They gather. They separate again. And in doing so, they reshape the surface of the desert little by little. The Sphinx is part of this process. Not separate from it. Not resisting it. But included within it. Over long periods, the wind leaves its signature on the stone. Not as clear markings, but as subtle smoothing. As gentle rounding of edges. As a softening of what once may have been more defined. And yet, even as it changes the surface, it does not erase the form. The lion body remains recognizable. The human face remains present. The overall shape continues to stand against the movement around it. This balance between change and continuity is quiet, but constant. The desert breathes. The Sphinx endures. Together, they form a kind of slow dialogue. One speaking in movement. The other responding in stillness. There are times when the air feels completely still. No visible movement in the sand. No shifting of light beyond the natural passing of the sun. In those moments, the Sphinx feels especially present. Not because it becomes more active, but because everything around it becomes quieter. Silence in the desert is not empty. It has weight. It has depth. It can feel almost like presence itself. And within that silence, the Sphinx does not stand out by contrast. It blends into it, as if it belongs naturally to that quiet state. People who spend time in such environments often begin to notice changes in their own sense of time. Minutes feel different. Thoughts slow down. Attention becomes less scattered. There is less urgency to move from one idea to another. Instead, there is space for a single moment to extend. To remain. To be observed fully before it passes. The Sphinx, in its stillness, encourages this kind of experience. Not intentionally, but simply by being what it is. A form that does not demand attention, yet holds it when given. A presence that does not speak, yet creates space for thought. As the day passes into night, the desert breathes out again. The temperature drops slowly. The sky darkens. Stars begin to appear, one by one, like distant points of memory returning to view. And the Sphinx, now less visible, becomes part of that larger stillness. It does not disappear. It simply blends more fully into the world around it. The outlines soften. The details fade. And what remains is presence without clear form. In this state, the mystery feels even deeper. Because without sharp edges or visible detail, the imagination begins to fill the space more freely. Not with certainty, but with feeling. A sense that something ancient is still there, just beyond sight. The desert continues its slow rhythm through the night. Breathing without sound. Moving without direction. And the Sphinx remains within it, as it always has. Not changing its place. Not breaking its silence. Just continuing to exist within the long, steady breath of time. The night stretches onward. The stars remain fixed in their distant patterns. And the Sphinx rests quietly beneath them, part of the desert's endless, gentle rhythm. There are moments in the desert when time feels like it has paused. Not because it has stopped, but because everything is moving so slowly that movement almost disappears from notice. The Sphinx exists within those moments. Not as something frozen, but as something that moves on a scale too quiet to easily see. Night deepens again over the plateau. The sky becomes a wide field of darkness, filled with distant points of light. Stars that seem unchanging, though they are always shifting in ways too slow to feel in a single lifetime. Beneath them, the Sphinx rests in its familiar position. The lion body stretched across the earth. The human face turned toward the horizon that cannot be seen in the dark. Its form is less visible now, but not absent. It is still there, shaped by memory, light, and the outline of stone beneath night air. In the quiet of this hour, the desert feels especially large. Not empty. Just large. A space where sound does not travel far, and thoughts seem to slow naturally, as if following the same rhythm as the wind. The Sphinx does not break this silence. It holds it. Not by force, but by simply remaining. And in that remaining, it becomes something that feels both close and distant at the same time. Close enough to stand before. Distant enough to feel unreachable in meaning. Over the long passage of time, many questions have gathered around it. Questions about its origin, its purpose, its age, its meaning. And yet, none of these questions have fully settled into final answers. They continue to exist beside the Sphinx, not as problems waiting to be solved, but as thoughts that follow it through time. Like shadows that change shape but never fully leave. There is a quiet comfort in that unfinished quality. A sense that not everything needs to be concluded. Not everything needs to be fully understood in order to be present. The Sphinx does not offer closure. It offers continuity. It remains, even as understanding shifts around it. Even as language changes. Even as memory becomes softer with time. There is something gentle about that endurance. It does not insist on importance. It does not announce meaning. It simply continues to exist within the flow of time, without resisting it and without being carried away by it. As the night moves forward, the desert grows even quieter. The wind becomes less noticeable. The sand lies still across the ground. And the Sphinx, though barely visible, feels more present in its absence of motion than many things that are fully seen. In this stillness, the imagination does not need to work to create meaning. It simply rests. Observing. Allowing thoughts to drift without direction. The idea of the Sphinx becomes less like a fixed object and more like a feeling. A sense of calm presence. A reminder of long time passing without urgency. A quiet point in a wide, moving world. And as this feeling settles, there is no need for it to resolve into something final. No need for explanation to complete it. It remains open. Softly unfinished. Like the desert itself. The night continues in its steady way. Stars remain above. Stone remains below. And between them, silence stretches gently through the air. The Sphinx stays within that space. Not as a mystery to be solved. But as a presence that continues. Through wind. Through time. Through memory. Through forgetting. Through everything that changes slowly enough to feel almost still. And even as the night moves toward its deepest hour, there is no sense of ending. Only continuation. Only quiet persistence. Only the soft, steady existence of something that has been there long before the present moment, and will remain long after it fades. The Sphinx does not conclude. It does not finish. It simply is. And in that simple presence, the story does not close. It continues, like the desert itself, without clear beginning and without final end. Just the ongoing, gentle passage of time. After the deepest part of night, the desert does not change suddenly. There is no sharp moment when darkness becomes light. Instead, it happens in a way so gentle that it is easy to miss unless one is already watching. The sky begins to soften first. Not bright, not yet colored, but less heavy than before. A quiet shift, almost invisible. Then, slowly, the horizon begins to remember itself. A faint line appears where there was only darkness. And the Sphinx, still resting in place, begins its quiet return into visibility. It has always been there. Even when unseen. Even when the night covered it completely. There is something steady in that thought. Something unhurried. As if the world does not need to confirm the Sphinx's presence for it to continue existing. It simply remains part of the land, whether visible or not. As morning grows closer, the air changes. The coolness of night begins to soften. A faint warmth starts to return to the sand. Not enough to be noticed immediately. But enough that, over time, the feeling of the desert shifts. The silence is still there. But it feels lighter. Less deep. More open. The Sphinx slowly reappears in this returning light. First as shape. then as outline, then as detail. Stone by stone, shadow by shadow, it comes back into view without having gone anywhere. The face is the first to be recognized again. Still calm. Still distant. Still turned toward the same horizon it has always faced. Then the body becomes clearer. The long lion form stretching across the ground. Low. Grounded. Patient. Nothing about it has changed overnight. And yet, the experience of seeing it again feels like a quiet renewal. Not a discovery, but a return. This daily return has happened for so long that it becomes part of the identity of the place. The Sphinx is not only a structure that exists in stone. It is something that participates in the rhythm of light itself. Morning does not arrive and find it new. It arrives and finds it already waiting. As the sun begins to rise, light spreads slowly across the surface of the stone. Not all at once, but in gradual layers. First the edges, then the upper surfaces, then the deeper shapes carved by time. The Sphinx does not move into this light. It simply receives it. And in that receiving, it appears once more as part of the visible world. The desert around it also changes with this light. The sand begins to glow softly. Small shadows become sharper for a moment, then soften again as the sun climbs higher. Everything becomes more defined, but also more open. More spacious. The Sphinx stands within this transition without taking part in it actively. It does not react to the sunrise. It does not shift. It does not acknowledge the change. And yet, it is fully part of it. This creates a kind of quiet tension between movement and stillness. Between what changes and what remains. The sun moves. The light changes. The desert transforms slowly hour by hour. And the Sphinx remains in the same position it has always held. Looking outward. Holding its silence. This repetition of return is one of the most subtle mysteries surrounding it. Because something that returns so reliably begins to feel less like an object and more like a rhythm. A pattern within time. A steady point that helps define everything around it. Without needing to move. Without needing to speak. It simply continues to be there when light returns. And when it fades again. People who experience this cycle over time may begin to feel a shift in their own sense of passing hours. The day does not feel fragmented. It feels connected. As if morning and evening are not separate events, but parts of a single long movement. And the Sphinx stands at the center of that movement, unchanged in posture, yet always present in its unfolding. As the morning becomes fully established, the desert becomes clearer. The sky brightens. The horizon sharpens. The stone becomes fully visible again. And for a brief moment, everything feels simple. Light. Sand. Stone. Sky. But even in this simplicity, there is depth. Because beneath what is visible, there is always the awareness of everything that came before. All the nights. All the silences. All the slow changes that led to this moment of clarity. The Sphinx holds that history without showing it. It does not display its past. It simply carries it. And as the day continues forward, that quiet carrying continues as well. Not as weight, but as presence. A steady existence that does not need to explain itself in order to remain meaningful. The sun rises higher. The desert grows brighter. And the Sphinx remains exactly as it has always been. Still. Patient. Watching the horizon that does not change, even as everything around it continues to move. And so the morning settles fully into the land once again. not as something new, but as something that has always been returning. And the Sphinx, as always, remains within it. As the sun climbs higher, the desert begins to lose the softness of early morning. Light grows stronger. Shadows shorten. The surface of the sand becomes brighter, almost pale in places where the heat gathers. And yet, even in this increasing brightness, the Sphinx does not feel exposed. It feels steady. As if light does not reveal it, but simply returns it to view, the way it has always been. There is a strange relationship between distance and presence here. The Sphinx is large, close enough to walk toward, close enough to stand beside. And yet it often feels distant. Not physically, but in the way it exists beyond easy understanding. This sense of distance is not created by space alone. It is created by time, by silence, by the long, slow accumulation of moments that cannot be fully held at once. Standing before it, one might notice how still it truly is. Not just in posture, but in its refusal to participate in the passing of time in an obvious way. Everything around it moves in visible ways. The wind shifts the sand. Heat rises from the ground. Light changes color as the day progresses. Even the sky seems to deepen and soften with each passing hour. But the Sphinx remains unchanged in its position. It does not follow these movements. It exists alongside them. And in that coexistence, something subtle becomes clear. The Sphinx is not separate from time. It is surrounded by it, held within it, like a quiet center around which everything else slowly turns. This creates a feeling that is difficult to describe directly. It is not urgency. It is not excitement. It is not even curiosity in its usual form. It is something slower, more settled. A sense that what is being observed has already existed long before the act of observing began, and will continue after it ends. This is part of what gives the Sphinx its quiet weight. Not physical weight, but the weight of continuity. Of being present across stretches of time that are too large to easily imagine. The longer one stands near it, the more the surrounding world seems to shift in relation to it. The movement of clouds. The shifting brightness of the sky. Even the movement of one's own thoughts begins to feel slower. More spaced out. Less urgent. The Sphinx does not ask for this change. It simply creates the conditions for it by remaining still. In the middle of the desert, where there is little else to hold attention for long periods, the Sphinx becomes a point of focus without effort. Not because it demands attention, but because it does not release it quickly. The eyes return to it naturally. Again and again. Not searching for answers, but resting in its presence. As the day continues, the light becomes harsher for a time. The surfaces of the stone become more defined. Small cracks and textures become easier to see. Details that were soft in the morning now appear more clearly under the stronger sun. But even this clarity does not resolve the deeper questions surrounding it. If anything, it reinforces them. Because seeing more detail does not necessarily bring understanding. It simply reveals more surface, more texture, more signs of time. And beneath all of that, the larger questions remain unchanged. Why this form? Why this place? Why this silence that has lasted so long? These questions do not grow louder in the daylight. They simply remain, like distant thoughts that do not demand immediate attention. And so the Sphinx continues through the day without interruption. The heat rises and falls. The light shifts. The desert breathes its slow rhythm. And the stone remains in its fixed orientation, facing outward, holding its quiet gaze. There is a kind of endurance in this that does not feel forceful. It feels natural. As if remaining still for this long is not an effort, but simply the nature of what it is. The world around it changes constantly. But the Sphinx does not need to adjust to those changes. It observes them only by being present within them. And in that presence, it becomes something like a reference point. A steady form that allows the movement of everything else to be noticed more clearly. Without it, the shifting desert might feel less structured, more open, more undefined. But with it, the changes gain contrast. Movement becomes more visible because something remains unmoving beside it. As the afternoon approaches, the light begins to soften slightly again. The harshness of midday slowly eases. Shadows begin to stretch once more, though not yet long enough to suggest evening. The Sphinx remains at the center of this transition. Unchanged in shape. Unchanged in direction. Unchanged in silence. And yet, fully part of the changing world around it. This is the quiet weight it carries. Not burden. Not pressure. But continuity. The sense that something can remain in place through all variations of light and time without needing to become anything different. And as the day moves forward, that sense does not fade. It simply continues. Like the desert itself. Like the sky above it. Like the slow turning of the world that never needs to announce itself in order to be real. The Sphinx remains. And in that remaining, the mystery continues quietly, without end, without urgency, and without need for conclusion. There are things in the world that cannot be brought back exactly as they once were. Not because they are gone completely, but because time does not allow anything to return in its original form. It only allows continuation in new shapes. The Sphinx stands within that truth. It has existed through so much passing time that the idea of its original state becomes difficult to hold with certainty. Even if it could be seen clearly today, untouched by wind or sand, there would still be a distance between what it is now and what it once was. That distance is not only physical. It is also made of time. Of forgotten moments. Of changes too small to notice in any single lifetime. The surface of the stone carries this quietly. Not as a clear record, but as a gradual accumulation. A soft layering of experience that cannot be separated into individual events. No single moment of change stands alone. Instead, everything blends together. Wind, light, heat, sand, time moving without pause. And so, what remains is not a preserved version of the past, but a continuous presence shaped by it. This is why looking at the Sphinx often creates a feeling that is hard to define. It does not feel like a finished object. It feels like something still in motion, even while remaining still. Not moving in space, but moving through time. Slowly. Quietly. Without visible transition. There is a difference between remembering something clearly and sensing something that cannot be fully remembered. The Sphinx exists more in that second space. It does not offer a complete picture of its past. It offers fragments. Shadows of possibility. Hints of long duration. And in those fragments, the mind begins to fill in the gaps. Not with certainty, but with imagination shaped by silence. People who stand before it may find themselves thinking in slower patterns. Less about exact answers. More about atmosphere. About what it might have felt like to exist in a place that has remained so steady for so long. The heat of the stone. The stillness of the air. The distant movement of sand across open ground. These impressions do not belong to one time period alone. They feel extended, as if they could belong to many different moments layered on top of each other. This layering is part of what makes the Sphinx feel so distant, even when it is physically near. It is not only an object in front of the eyes. It is also a presence shaped by everything that has passed over it. And much of that cannot be recovered in detail. There are no complete records held within the stone itself. No clear explanation carved into its surface. Only the results of long exposure. The softened edges. The worn textures. The gradual shaping of form through time rather than sudden change. Because of this, attempts to fully reconstruct its original meaning always remain partial. They can suggest possibilities. They can connect patterns. They can offer interpretations. But they cannot return the Sphinx to a single, fixed origin that explains everything completely. That origin, if it exists in full clarity, remains beyond reach. Not hidden intentionally, but dissolved into the long flow of time. And so, what cannot be recovered becomes part of its identity. Not as loss in a sharp sense, but as quiet absence. An absence that is always present. The missing clarity becomes part of what the Sphinx is now. Just as much as the visible stone. Just as much as the shape that remains. In this way, the Sphinx does not ask to be fully restored in understanding. It does not depend on complete explanation to exist meaningfully. It continues regardless of how much is known or unknown about its beginning. There is a kind of calm in that. A sense that not everything must be brought back into full view in order to be respected or felt. Some things remain partly out of reach. And still hold presence. Still hold weight. Still hold quiet significance. As the day continues, light moves across the surface once more, revealing details, then softening them again. Nothing stays fully fixed in perception. Everything shifts slightly depending on time, angle, and distance. And the Sphinx remains within all of that shifting. Neither fully revealed nor fully concealed. Always partly known. Always partly beyond reach. This balance between presence and absence is what gives it such a long-lasting quietness. It does not insist on completion. It does not demand resolution. It allows time to continue doing what it has always done. Changing everything slowly. Without needing to explain each change. And so the Sphinx remains, not as a finished story, but as an ongoing one. One that cannot be fully returned to its beginning. Because its beginning, like so much of its meaning, has been carried forward by time itself. Not preserved, but transformed. Quietly. Continuously. Without end. There is a gentle truth about long-lasting things. They do not stay the same in the way people often imagine. Even when they remain in one place, even when their outline can still be recognized, they are always being rewritten in small, quiet ways. Not by intention, but by time itself. The Sphinx is part of that slow rewriting. Each passing year adds something that cannot be easily separated from what came before. A slight change in texture. A softened etch. A new layer of dust settling into older lines. Nothing dramatic on its own. But together, these small changes form a continuous adjustment of appearance. As if the surface is always being gently edited by the world around it. The wind is one of the most patient writers in this process. It does not hurry. It does not force change. It passes again and again over the same surfaces, carrying fine particles that touch stone in soft repetition. Over long stretches of time, repetition becomes transformation. What once had sharper definition begins to feel smoother. What once stood clearly outlined begins to feel more blended into its surroundings. This is not destruction in a sudden sense. It is a slow rewriting of form. The sun participates in this as well, in its own quiet way. Day after day, the stone is warmed, then cooled, then warmed again. This cycle does not change the Sphinx quickly, but it adds a rhythm of expansion and contraction so subtle it cannot be seen directly. Only its effects are felt over time. A gradual shifting of surface tension. A softening that belongs not to one moment, but to countless moments combined. And so the Sphinx does not hold a single fixed appearance. It holds a version of itself that is always slightly in transition. Even when standing still, it is part of this long, almost invisible process. This creates an unusual kind of presence. One that is stable enough to be recognized, but fluid enough to never feel entirely locked into one form. In this way, the Sphinx becomes something like a record that is still being written. Not in words, but in texture, in shape, in the quiet interaction between stone and environment. And because this writing is so slow, it cannot be read all at once. It must be observed over time. In different lights. In different seasons. At different distances. Each moment reveals a slightly different version of the same form. And none of those versions are complete on their own. They are all partial views of something that continues to change even as it is observed. This is part of why the Sphinx often feels larger than its physical size. Not because it expands in space, but because it extends across time. Each moment of observation connects to many other moments, both before and after. And together, they create a sense of continuity that cannot be contained in a single view. Standing before it, there is often a feeling that what is being seen is only one small frame within a much longer unfolding. A snapshot of something that does not stop moving through time, even while it appears still. This feeling does not require explanation to exist. It simply arises from the nature of long observation. The Sphinx encourages this kind of awareness without effort. Not by changing, but by remaining. The longer it is looked at, the more it seems to extend beyond the immediate moment. Not into movement, but into duration. Into a sense that what is present has been present for far longer than the current view can contain. And so the mind begins to stretch its sense of time as well. Not rushing forward, but slowing down. Adjusting to the scale of something that cannot be measured in quick impressions. This adjustment is subtle. It does not feel like learning something new. It feels like remembering something that was never fully known in the first place. The Sphinx does not instruct this process. It simply exists in a way that makes it possible. As the light shifts again toward late afternoon, shadows begin to lengthen slowly across the ground. The surface of the stone changes appearance once more. What was bright becomes softened. What was detailed becomes gently subdued. And the Sphinx continues its quiet rewriting under the same sun, in the same place, as it has always done. Nothing about this process reaches a final version. There is no point where the rewriting ends. Because time does not end its movement. It continues. And what exists within it continues as well. The Sphinx remains part of that ongoing movement without needing to be anything other than what it already is. A shape. A presence. A surface being slowly, gently rewritten by the world around it. And in that endless, quiet rewriting, its mystery does not fade. It simply deepens. There are places in the world where answers seem to arrive easily. Clear explanations. Simple conclusions. straight paths from question to solution. But the Sphinx does not feel like one of those places. It does not offer that kind of clarity. Instead, it feels like a place where answers, even when they appear, do not fully settle. They seem to hover for a moment, then drift slightly, then soften again into uncertainty. This does not feel frustrating in the quiet atmosphere of the desert. It feels natural, as if the environment itself is shaped to resist final conclusions. The Sphinx stands within that quality of space, not resisting understanding, but not completing it either. Over time, many ideas have been placed around it. Ideas about purpose, ideas about origin, ideas about meaning. Each one offering a different way of looking. Each one adding another layer of interpretation. But none of them fully replace the sense of mystery that remains underneath them all. Because the Sphinx itself does not change to match any explanation. It remains constant. And that constancy keeps the space around it open. There is something unusual about encountering an object that does not resolve into a single interpretation. Most things in daily life eventually become familiar. They are understood, named, placed into categories. But the Sphinx resists that final step of settling completely into definition. It remains slightly beyond closure. Not distant in a physical sense, but distant in understanding. And this distance creates a quiet kind of attention. A slower way of looking. A longer way of thinking. Standing before it, one may notice how thoughts begin to move differently. Less toward conclusion. More toward observation. Less toward certainty. More toward reflection. This shift does not happen quickly. It happens gradually, over time spent simply being near it. The desert plays a part in this as well. Its openness does not offer distractions. There are no nearby structures demanding attention. No constant movement pulling the eyes away. Only space. Light. Stone. Sky. And within that simplicity, thought begins to slow naturally. Not because it is instructed to, but because there is nothing rushing it forward. The Sphinx, in this environment, becomes part of that slowing. Not actively shaping thought, but existing in a way that allows thought to settle. Or not settle. Both are possible here. And neither feels incomplete. Even the idea of answers begins to feel different in this place. Less like fixed points. More like temporary forms. Things that appear for a while, then shift again as perspective changes. This does not remove meaning. It changes how meaning is held. More lightly. More openly. Without the need for finality. The Sphinx itself does not appear concerned with finality. It does not suggest that there is a single correct way to understand it. It does not correct interpretation. It does not confirm interpretation. It simply continues to exist as it is. And in that continued existence, it allows many interpretations to exist alongside each other. Some focusing on form. Some focusing on history. Some focusing on symbolism. Some simply focusing on presence. None of these need to cancel the others. They can all remain, like overlapping impressions across a long surface of time. As the day moves toward its later hours, the light becomes softer again. The sharpness of midday fades. The desert begins to feel less intense, more spacious in tone. And the Sphinx stands within this transition, unchanged in position, yet different in appearance depending on how the light touches it. This shifting appearance reinforces the sense that nothing here is fully fixed in one interpretation. Not because it is unstable, but because it exists across changing conditions. And each condition reveals something slightly different. Still, none of those differences become final answers. They remain partial views. Like looking at the same place from slightly different distances over a long walk. Each view is real. But none of them are complete on their own. And so the Sphinx continues to exist in that space between clarity and uncertainty. Not pushing toward resolution. Not moving away from understanding. But remaining in a steady openness that does not close itself into a single meaning. As the light softens further, the shadows stretch gently across the sand again. The world becomes quieter in tone. More balanced. Less intense. And the Sphinx remains at the center of that quiet balance. Holding its shape. Holding its silence. Holding the space where answers appear, dissolve, and return again in softer forms. Not as something to be solved. But as something to be experienced over time, without needing to end. And in that ongoing experience, the mystery does not resolve. It simply continues, calmly, within the stillness of the desert evening. There comes a point in long observation where looking does not bring new certainty, but a deeper sense of space around uncertainty. The Sphinx exists within that space. Not at the center of a single answer. But at the edge where many possible answers begin to lose their sharpness. From a distance, its shape is simple. A resting form in the desert. A body stretched low. A face turned toward the horizon. But the longer it is observed, the more that simplicity begins to expand into something less defined. Not more complicated. Just more open. Like a quiet area that does not fill itself with explanation. The edge of understanding is not a place of confusion. It is a place where certainty softens. Where ideas become less rigid. Where meaning does not collapse into one form, but spreads gently across many possibilities. The Sphinx sits at that edge without moving. It does not step forward into clarity. It does not retreat into obscurity. It simply remains where interpretation begins to thin. This creates a strange balance. Close enough to feel present. Far enough to feel beyond full comprehension. And that balance is not unstable. It is steady. Like a long line drawn across sand that is constantly being reshaped, yet never fully erased. Over time, people have come and gone from this place. Each one bringing a different way of seeing. Each one leaving with a slightly different impression. Some may leave with a sense of connection to something ancient and grounded. Others may leave with a sense of unanswered questions that feel calm rather than unsettling. Others may simply leave with the memory of stillness. None of these responses are complete explanations. But all of them are valid within the space the Sphinx creates. Because it does not define what it must mean. It allows meaning to form gently and then shift again over time. The desert around it reinforces this feeling. It does not hold fixed outlines for long. Sand moves. Light changes. Air shifts. Nothing remains in a single position for very long, except the Sphinx itself. And even that stillness does not feel rigid. It feels continuous. As if it is part of the same slow movement, just expressed differently. This is where the edge of understanding becomes most noticeable. Not in what is unknown, but in what refuses to become fully fixed. The Sphinx does not close into explanation. It stays open in form. And that openness allows perception to move around it in different ways without arriving at a final shape. There is a quiet patience in this kind of presence. It does not hurry toward conclusion. It does not push toward resolution. It allows time to continue doing what it does best. softening everything that tries to become final. As the light continues to shift through the later part of the day, the Sphinx changes again in appearance. Not in structure, but in how it is seen. Shadows lengthen. Surfaces soften. Details become less distinct, then more distinct again depending on the angle of view. Each change reveals something slightly different, but none of them complete the picture entirely. It is always partial. Always part of a larger unfolding that cannot be captured in one moment. This is why the experience of it often feels less like learning something new, and more like adjusting to a different way of seeing. A slower way. A wider way. A way that does not rush towards certainty. And in that adjustment, the idea of mystery does not feel like something missing. It feels like something present. Something that continues to exist without needing to be resolved. The Sphinx does not hide answers. It simply does not offer them in a final form. And so the edge remains. Quiet. Stable. Unmoving. A place where understanding approaches, pauses, and then gently expands outward again instead of closing. As the day moves closer to evening, the desert becomes softer once more. The harshness of light fades. The ground cools. The sky begins to shift toward deeper tones. And the Sphinx remains in that transition, unchanged in its position, yet fully part of the changing world around it. Still at the edge. Still not resolving into a single meaning. Still allowing time, light, and thought to pass over it without conclusion. And in that quiet openness, the mystery continues to exist without needing to end. There are rare moments in the desert when everything feels almost suspended. Not frozen. Not stopped. Just held, gently, in a kind of deep stillness where even movement feels far away. The air does not feel heavy in those moments. It feels wide. As if space itself has opened and is simply resting. The Sphinx exists within that kind of stillness without changing it. It does not create it. It does not interrupt it. It simply remains present as it passes through. Sometimes the wind is so quiet that the sand appears completely settled. No shifting patterns. No drifting lines. Only the soft surface of the ground, resting under light that does not yet feel like morning or evening. In these moments, time feels less like something moving forward and more like something pausing in place. Not ending. Just pausing. And the Sphinx, with its long, unmoving form, becomes part of that pause. Its presence does not stand out sharply against the silence. It blends into it. As if silence itself has taken shape. There is a kind of softness in this experience that is difficult to describe in precise terms. It is not emptiness. It is not fullness. It is something in between. A quiet suspension where attention does not need to move from one thing to another. It can simply remain. Resting. Observing. Without urgency. The Sphinx does not change in response to the stillness. It does not become more defined or less defined. It simply exists within it, the same as always. But perception changes around it. The mind slows. Thoughts become less structured. And the sense of distance between observer and object begins to soften. Not disappear. But soften. As if the boundary between looking and being present in the same space becomes less rigid for a moment. The desert has always had this ability. To quiet everything that enters it. Not by force. But by openness. There are no tight edges here. No crowded boundaries. Only wide space that allows everything to settle into its own rhythm. And within that rhythm, the Sphinx continues its long, patient presence. It does not ask to be understood more quickly in these moments. It does not change its appearance to meet the stillness. It simply remains aligned with it. As if stillness and stone are not separate things here, but variations of the same quiet condition. When the wind eventually returns, it does so gently at first. A faint movement across the surface. Barely noticeable. Then a slight shift in the sand. Then a soft passing through open space. The stillness does not break suddenly. It dissolves slowly. Like something being gently released rather than removed. And the Sphinx remains within that transition, unchanged in form, but surrounded again by subtle motion. This return of movement does not feel like an interruption. It feels like continuation. As if stillness and motion are not opposites here, but alternating expressions of the same long rhythm. The Sphinx does not belong only to quiet moments. It belongs equally to moving ones. It exists in both without needing to choose between them. This is part of its quiet mystery. It does not separate states of the world into strict divisions. It holds them together in one continuous presence. Stillness. Movement. Light. Shadow. Silence. Wind. All passing through the same space. All touching the same surface. As the day slowly begins to shift again, even if almost imperceptibly, the desert returns to its familiar rhythm. Not loud. Not sudden. Just steady change. And the Sphinx continues to be part of that rhythm without ever stepping outside of it. There is no moment where it feels disconnected from the world around it. Even in stillness, it is part of movement. Even in silence, it is part of sound that has not yet arrived. Even in absence of change, it remains within change itself. And so the mystery does not grow smaller with stillness. It simply becomes quieter. More subtle. More spread out across time. Not something to be solved. But something that continues to exist, even when everything else feels like it has paused. And in that quiet continuation, the Sphinx remains. As always. Without beginning. Without end. Only presence, gently held within the slow breath of the desert. There are moments when understanding feels very close. Not fully present. But near enough that it almost takes shape. Like a thought that is just about to become clear, then gently fades before it can be held. The Sphinx often exists in that kind of nearness. It does not step forward into clarity. But it does not disappear into distance either. It stays in a quiet middle space. Where meaning feels possible, but never complete. Standing before it, there can be a subtle sense that something is just beyond recognition. Not hidden in a dramatic way. But softened by time. As if the answer, if it once existed clearly, has slowly dissolved into layers of change. This feeling does not create tension. It creates quiet attention. A slower way of noticing. A deeper kind of looking. The Sphinx does not move closer to resolve this feeling. It does not adjust itself to make understanding easier. It remains exactly as it is. And because of that, the sense of almost knowing continues to exist around it. Not resolved. Not removed. Just present. The desert itself supports this feeling. It does not offer sharp distinctions. Its edges are soft. Its transitions gradual. Sand becomes sky without a clear boundary in the distance. Light becomes shadow without a visible line between them. Everything changes, but nothing changes suddenly. And the Sphinx is part of that same softness. Not an interruption in the landscape, but an extension of it. a form that holds its shape while still belonging to the same quiet flow of time and space. As the light shifts through the day, perception of the Sphinx changes with it. In stronger light, its details appear more defined. In softer light, its edges blend more gently into the surroundings. In shadow, it becomes more suggestion than outline. Each version feels slightly different, yet all are true in their own moment. None of them fully complete the whole. This shifting perception adds to the sense that understanding is always partial, always dependent on condition, always shaped by time of day, distance, and attention. And so what is seen is never fully fixed. It moves gently with the world around it. There is something calm in this lack of final clarity. It removes urgency. It removes the need to reach a single conclusion. Instead, it allows observation to continue without pressure. The Sphinx does not insist on being fully understood in order to be meaningful. It exists meaningfully without resolution. And that is where its quiet mystery continues to live. Not in what is hidden, but in what remains slightly out of reach, no matter how long it is observed. Even over time, even with repeated viewing, that small distance remains. Not large enough to feel distant. Not small enough to disappear. Just enough to keep perception gently open. As the afternoon light begins to soften again, the desert slowly transitions toward evening. Shadows stretch a little further. The heat begins to ease. The atmosphere becomes less sharp, more gentle in tone. And the Sphinx continues to stand within that shift, unchanged in form, yet always part of the changing environment. It does not hold on to one version of itself. It moves through all versions without resistance. Seen differently at different times. Yet never fully becoming any single one of them. This creates a sense that the Sphinx is not defined by one moment, but by many moments layered together. A presence built not from a single point in time, but from continuous passage through time. And because of that, it never fully settles into one interpretation. It remains open. Even as it remains still. Even as it remains in place. The feeling of almost known does not disappear. It simply becomes part of the experience of being near it. A quiet reminder that not everything reveals itself completely, even when it is fully visible. Some things remain gently unfinished in understanding. Not incomplete in a negative way, but open in a lasting way. As evening draws closer, that openness feels even more natural. The world becomes quieter again. The light softens further. And the Sphinx stands within that softening, as it always has. Not answering the feeling of nearness. Not closing it. Just allowing it to exist. As part of the long, slow experience of being in its presence. And in that space between knowing and not knowing, the mystery continues quiet, steady, and unbroken. In the end, there is no final moment when the Sphinx becomes fully understood. There is no single explanation that settles everything into place. No last detail that completes the picture in a permanent way. Instead, there is only continuation. The same slow presence that has always been there. The same stone shape resting in the desert light. The same quiet face turned toward the horizon. Over time, many thoughts have passed around it. Many interpretations. Many attempts to bring clarity to what remains uncertain. And yet, none of them change the simplest truth. The Sphinx is still here. Still present. Still part of the land it rises from. The desert around it continues its gentle movement. Sand shifts. Wind passes. Light changes from hour to hour. From day to night. From night back into day again. And through all of it, the Sphinx remains in its place. Not resisting time. Not escaping it. Simply existing within it. There is something calm in that kind of endurance. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just steady. A presence that does not ask to be completed in order to matter. A form that does not require a final answer to remain meaningful. As the sky slowly softens once more, the colors begin to fade into evening. Shadows lengthen across the ground. The details of the stone become less distinct. Then softer still. Until the Sphinx begins to blend again into the quiet tones of the desert night. And in that fading light, it does not feel like disappearance. It feels like return. Return to silence. Return to stillness. Return to the same gentle condition it has always been part of. The mystery does not end here. It does not resolve into closure. It does not arrive at a final explanation. Instead, it remains where it has always been. In the space between knowing and not knowing. Between presence and distance. Between what is seen and what is only felt. And that space does not need to be filled. It only needs to be observed. Quietly. Patiently. As the desert continues its long, slow breathing. As the night continues to settle. As the world continues its gentle movement around something that does not move at all. The Sphinx remains. And in its remaining, the story does not truly end. It simply becomes part of the silence that follows. Soft. Wide. Unfinished. Like the desert itself.